Entity selection and critical documents. Prepared for and presented at the 2018 Square One Entrepreneurship Training Program. Square One is a program of the Center for Emerging Technologies. CET is an affiliate of the Cortex Innovation Community. Square One is funded in part by the Missouri Technology Corporation.
So by show of hands, can you guys give me an idea where you are in entity formation and what you're doing? Who has not yet formed? Okay, a couple of people. Who has formed? Who is an LLC? Who is an S Corp? Anybody a C Corp, you daredevils? No, okay, somebody's been telling. You're a C Corp?
I might turn into one.
You might, well that's good, that's exactly what you want to say to me, that's awesome. I hope all of you turn in to a C Corp, not at the stroke of midnight, but the stroke of 8 o'clock in the morning, that will start your new future in the right way. But I love the answer that I'm going to turn into one, I'm not yet one. So I just want to get an idea, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. And Elton, forgive me, I will talk just a little bit about trademarks and copyright, but I'll skip a lot over that since I know you're right behind me, so that's wonderful. So thanks for being here. You guys are dedicated to your futures and your businesses, and most importantly, as someone who has lived most of my life in St. Louis, you're dedicated to economic development in St. Louis. So I give you my thanks and my appreciation. We need more of you here and more of you to stay here. So as Christy said, I've worked with entrepreneurs for a large part of my life, even when I was in private practice before I started teaching at WashU. And one of the things that I always want to talk to entrepreneurs about and startups about is laying that foundation. It's boring, it sucks, I will tell you that myself. It is concrete, it's rebar, but if you don't lay it correctly, you will not be able to build your mission, your goal, your future on that concrete foundation. So my point here today is to talk to you about some of that formation, relating to that foundation, relating to formation, but also relating to some other things that you might want to consider at the early stages of your organization. So when I talk about a foundation, I truly mean a foundation. Sorry, some of that turned out a little lighter than I imagined. So you can't have a building without a foundation, especially with the weather, the way it's turning around the world lately. So what I want to talk to you about is, I sometimes bring a big Jenga, like a human-sized Jenga, and talk about building a foundation, but we'll talk about it just by looking at pictures about it. So I think of it as 4 walls. All 4 walls of that foundation are connected. They all relate to each other. They can't exist without the other walls. You can't have a foundation with 2 parallel walls or 1 wall or 3 that are not congruent, right? So all of these walls relate, and I want you to keep reminding yourself of that. And maybe at the end of this talk, we'll do an exercise about getting out literally your 4 walls and figuring out what you need in those 4 walls. The first wall I start with is legal. That's my wheelhouse. That's where I want to start, and that's why you guys are here. The second wall is financial. Again, rebar concrete connects it. That's financial. It's in light colors over there. Financial. So that's where are you getting the money? How are you getting the money? How are you writing down documents that you need for money, whether it's from a bank or an investor or an angel or a friend or family? And again, take that rebar, bend it, go to the third wall. We're going to talk about personnel. Who are the people you need, and how are you going to get those people, and how are you going to pay for what their roles and responsibilities are and what your roles and responsibilities with regard to them are, right? And then finally, the stuff that you guys do really well, that you want to do and you love doing, that's why you're here, is the operational. What are you going to do with your business? What is it going to serve? Is it a service? Is it a product? How are you going to get it to the market? And really what I'm going to focus on very briefly is risk management and asset protection. And then I think it's going to segue perfectly into what Elton's going to talk about in terms of the intellectual property assets, that whether you think you have it or not, I guarantee you have it. So let's start with the legal wall. Oh my God, how many entrepreneur entities have you heard of, right? This is kind of what I feel like sometimes after I leave with an entrepreneurial group and they said, I want to be a C Corp right away. I'm like, power to you, how much money do you have? How much administrative oversight capabilities do you have? That's great. We also hear about L3Cs, right? Who's heard of L3Cs? Low profit, limited liability company. It's a hybrid. It's a for-profit / non-profit. Gets a little bit of both worlds. We're not going to go too much into that today. LLCs, B Corp. Have you heard of B Corp? Thank you. Different than a benefit corporation, right? Benefit corporation's kind of out in California. B Corp is like a seal of approval an organization that's kind of like, what is the free trade kind of stamp, right? tax exempt organizations, C corporations, S corporations. So this is how old I am. I'm giving my age away. When I first started practicing law, we only really had C corporations. S corporations came along and it was really exciting. It was really exciting. And then I still remember when I was fifth year associate at my law firm, one of the partners came into my office and said, "What is this LLC business somebody's talking about? Go find out." And that's when I first discovered LLCs, and the first LLC I dealt with was in Arizona, believe it or not. Missouri didn't recognize them at the time. So in the legal world, when you talk about jurisprudence, those organizations are relatively new, but they're not new to you because they've been around here for 20, 30 years, right? So how do you decide what you're going to be? I'm gonna give you a cheat sheet. Print this out. I think you guys will all get access to this presentation. Yep. So print this out, stick it somewhere where you can remember and you can decide. Most of you have already decided to be LLCs, but this gives you an idea of what the different types of organizations that really you focus on as a for-profit organization. Anybody thinking of being a nonprofit by chance? Okay, great. That's a conversation that I'll build in. Thank you for that. So 2 people or nonprofits will work with that. So sole proprietorship. If you have done nothing but just started your business and done your business, you're a sole proprietor. What does that mean? Absolutely nothing. It just means you're doing your business. You're paying taxes through your own. It's you. It's just a fancy way of saying that you're working and doing something. You don't have any protection from legal liability. You don't have to do anything to form. You just have to set up shop and go. Some people choose to do this because they just think, oh, there's no inherent risk in the business I'm doing. It's just me. I don't really need to do it with anybody else. And I don't want to go through the hassle of doing paperwork and whatever that I'm doing. So I'm just going to do it as a sole proprietor. That's great. That's great. If you're confident that there's no inherent risk that can attach to you personally versus the organization. Because with the sole proprietorship, there is no other person. There's no other entity. It's just you, right? So then we got C Corp. That is the original corporation. It's called C because it's under subchapter C of the Internal Revenue Code. That's why we have to pay homage to our IRS friends by making sure we call the organizations the right thing. So we have a C Corp. C Corp basically is a traditional corporation. It is a separate corporate entity. The corporation retains all its earnings. It does its own thing, and we'll talk about making sure it's a different organization from you. But once there's any capital that flows through to the shareholders or members in an LLC, it's double taxation. You don't have a choice of being a C corporation if you're big enough or if you think you're going to go public, right? That's kind of why C corporations saved for that. So unless you know you're going to go public tomorrow, or you have investors who want the transparency of a C corporation lined up already, then that's when you're a C corp. Or if you start as a C corp, you can always convert, like the gentleman in the back said as well. Perpetual terms, a lot of other things are pretty much the same, except the key difference with what I'm talking about the other organizations is the double taxation. A corporation pays tax. Let's say you earn $10, the corporation pays tax, and then whatever's left, it dividends out or distributes to the shareholders. The shareholders then pay their individual tax rate on that earning. So the same $10 pays double taxation, right? So thankfully, we had partnerships. Partnerships were kind of, this muddy kind of thing, and we still have partnerships. Partnerships is a group of people getting together, saying it's flow through taxation, and we want to be partnerships rather than a corporation because certainly it's a little bit more flexible in certain ways, particularly when you're doing property redevelopment and things like that. So we'll see some of that. Partnerships still exist in that. Medical practices to some extent, legal practices, services, still at times maybe partnerships, although I think everybody's moving away from that. But the problem with partnerships was it didn't protect the individual from personal liability because there was no entity. The partnership itself was not an entity, it was just a group of people acting together. So then we came up with an S corporation, which taxes the member shareholders of an S corporation, flow through just like a partnership, but it provides an entity that provides protection for the people behind the entity. So in the law, we call it the corporate veil, right? So think of a veil, you can see through it, and you know who's behind there, but you can't touch them. Because it's a veil made out of steel or something, I don't know. But you see them, but you can't touch them. So if you have to sue the S Corp or S Corp, we sue the S Corp, if they maintain the veil correctly, you can't get to the individuals behind the veil. So that's kind of the idea. You'll hear the term corporate veil or piercing the veil, things like that. So flow through taxation, which is great, just like partnerships. The S Corp doesn't pay the taxes, so all of it flows through to the shareholders of the S Corp or the shareholders. When I say all, Some can be retained, obviously, but there's a formula that has to be maintained to make sure that the S Corp is not holding on to too much capital. It flows through to the shareholders. The shareholders then pay the only tax on that $10 based on their individual tax rate. So it's flow-through taxation, single tax. That's a huge advantage, right? And so why we came up as recently as the 80s, and so with an LLC and limited liability companies, what LLC stands for, right? So one of the things with the LLC is lawyers went crazy because this is like the coolest tool ever. I mean, this was so fun to work with because it is the most flexible organization you can have, which is fantastic. It's the most flexible corporation you can have, which is terrible. So you got to figure out too much flexibility, too little flexibility. There's some kind of happy medium, right? As my kids say, there's a pleased psychic. Get it? Happy medium. Thank you. I like that. Please do that every time I say something funny. Nobody else is catching on. So.
Try to be a little bit early.
Yes. Thank you. Please tip your waiters when you leave them. So the LLC is really came to be kind of formed after the idea of an S corporation. The problem with an S corporation, because of getting the tax goodies that flow through taxation, the IRS basically said you can't have more than 25 shareholders. Most kinds of trusts cannot be shareholders. You cannot have a subsidiary. You cannot be a subsidiary. There are all these limitations that the C Corp didn't have, but in order to get the tax benefit of the flow through taxation, there are all these handcuffs. So what the LLC did was take away those handcuffs. Basically, an LLC is like an S Corp, except you can have as many members, not shareholders, as you want. You can be a subsidiary, you can have a subsidiary. You actually don't even have to have the administrative burden that the C Corp and S Corps have to have. You don't have to have a board if you're an LLC. You don't have to have regular minutes and meetings if you're an LLC. You don't have to have officers if you're an LLC. You don't even have to file an annual report with the state entity piece of it, if you're an LLC. An LLC is a free-for-all, right? Which is fantastic, but it's also pretty scary because some people, you put too much into the LLC that you don't need, and it becomes burdensome. It becomes burdensome. So I'm not sure. So are all of you formed in Missouri? Those who are LLCs? Okay, awesome. So, and Missouri's law in terms of LLCs is pretty straightforward. It's based on the model rule that almost all other states adhere to, close to 99 to 100%, right? There's a few differences, but not very many that are notable. So those are kind of the differences for the for-profit entities. So going to the two of you that are nonprofit entities, you're probably going to form as a state entity, not an LLC. You're going to form a Chapter 355 corporation, Missouri nonprofit corporation, right? The Missouri nonprofit corporation, that's all it is a corporation. Once you form that, you're just like these corporations, except you've got a different title. That's it. You have to file for tax exempt status under 501c, whichever you need. If you're a C3, if you're charitable, if you're a C7, a trade organization, if you're a C6, if you're a social organization, a C29, if you're a veterans organization, whatever that category you fall under, you file the appropriate documents. That's when you become tax exempt. You don't become, a lot of people come to our clinic and say, yeah, I filed as a nonprofit organization, so I'm tax exempt. Nope, that's just the beginning. And if you don't file for tax exempt status, you're going to be filing taxes just like the S corporation or C corporation is. So we can certainly talk a little bit more about that as we go.
Does everybody understand flow-through taxation and double taxation?
Yes.
All right, good.
Literally it's when we say double taxation, it's at the corporate level and the shareholder level. Flow through is it flows right through just to the shareholder. That's it. Just like a river, flowing river. So this is a great cheat sheet if you guys want to really look at it and think about it and what you want to do. So how do you decide? You guys have already made the decision, right? So I'm guessing you've made the decision based on some of these characteristics, right? Instead of an S Corp, an LLC, because it's got fewer limitations in terms of owners, right? You can have as many, you're not limited to 25, you can have trusts, you could have subsidiaries, you could be a subsidiary, all those different things, right? Payment of salary is not required. You can just have a distribution in an LLC. S corporation, it's payment of a salary, which is going to be above and beyond maybe what the dividend is, and that's taxable, either as self-employment or some other form of employment tax, right? Fewer administrative, I can't emphasize this enough, fewer to no administrative requirements for an LLC. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have some of those in place. I urge you to have meetings, have minutes. If you want, if officers, at least have officers or managers, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Multiple classes of ownership. So some of you, you might be rocking it and might be doing great. Some of you may be pretty cash strapped in the beginning of your organization, right? So you're not going to be paying somebody for doing your web design or providing, lease or whatever. You might be paying in equity in lieu of cash compensation. That's a great time to have a multiple class of ownership. You don't want the web designer that you're paying with 1% equity to have the same rights as you do, right? So that's a different way to do different classes. We'll talk about that. So over a C corporation, that's a no-brainer, right? Over a C corporation, well, it's double taxation. Let's just cut that double tax out until we need it. And hopefully everybody in this room is going to need to convert to a C corporation if you get good investors coming in. Or if you're not, if you're going to be solo, that's great. You don't need to be a C corporation at all. So one of the things that I wanted to point out is why form an entity at all, right? You guys all chose to form an entity just because somebody told you to or you just thought it was the right thing to do? Somebody told you. Protection, exactly. Somebody told you for good reason. It provides protection. The first thing it does, it lets people act together as one. If there's 2 people or 3 people, it's more than one person. That's an advantage, And even if you're just one person, it provides you liability from the corporate, from the business side, from the state law side. So again, that corporate veil, that piercing the veil that we're talking about. And it also kind of helps you, if you've got more than one person, to figure out ahead of time what kind of ownership and equity distributions people are entitled to. And we'll see, going through the rest of my slides, that there's all these other decisions you make in the operating agreement of the LLC. So I kind of like to think I practice preventative law, just like preventative medical care, and you go and get a checkup or get a shot or whatever. I think of the same thing when we talk about the law that I like to say I practice is preventative law. Lay that foundation correctly and keep checking on it, so you kick the tires, kick the foundation, the rebar, so you don't have to crumble once your business starts going. So we talk about conversion. So let's say we're going to talk about an LLC, right? And we're going to spend the rest of our conversation about an LLC. If you ever want to convert because you've got an investor coming in saying, I want more administrative transparency, which is what C Corp, in the beginning you don't want it because it's too much, right? But later some investors might want it, and then you're going to grow. Maybe you're going to have more and more and more, and you want some of that formality, but investors certainly will. That's when you convert. There's statutory conversion. There is, you can merge if your state doesn't allow for a statutory conversion from an LLC or an S Corp to a C Corp. Or you could just do a non-statutory conversion as well. So basically, really the difference is like Delaware, for example, as you would imagine, has a wonderful, very easy, very straightforward, highly regulated, but it's very easy to do, a statutory conversion process, right? Yes, ma'am?
But are those conversion processes always governed by where the business was formed or where it is actually performing business?
It's a combination of both. So if you're formed, a lot of organizations form in Delaware, but they never exist in Delaware other than a PO box, right? So they do that because they can use Delaware law, which is very friendly to corporations and business organizations. But they might be in Missouri, for example. And then even if with Missouri law, you can still do a Delaware conversion with mechanics. There are mechanics that you can use to do that. Another way, if you don't want to do the conversion, you can do a merger. Set up a C corporation, merge the LLC into it, and managing the tax assets, you have to manage those assets carefully to make sure that it is the surviving company, the C Corp, that is not a taxable event. You can certainly manage that on your books and records with the help of a solid accountant. But so yes, the statutory conversion is probably the most straightforward, and more states are adopting those. But the merger, statutory merger, every state has that. And that's pretty straightforward to do. Again, the only hiccup there is making sure that it becomes a non-tax event rather than a taxable event. If there's retained earnings in the LLC before merger, things like that. But that can be managed, yeah.
And is the conversion aspect only governed by state laws, or is there also a federal aspect of conversion?
So conversions are all state law because the organization, your LLC, is a state entity. It has nothing to do with federal law except for taxation. That's the only time federal law comes in, and intellectual property that Elton's going to talk to you about. So those are the applications of federal law. But most of they're beings of state, under the state auspices. Thank you, good question. So let's talk about the LLC just a little bit, and then we'll move into kind of the next category. It's a state law entity, fed right into your question, thank you. Since it's a state law entity, and so it protects you, gives you personal liability, it's separate from the individuals, things like that, right? So types, so this is kind of interesting. So depending on what kind of equity structure you're considering, and you may not know that. So these 4 walls that I talk about, sometimes you might have to do the finance part of it first to figure out the legal, you know, how kind of legal structure you want. I don't know. And sometimes you might have to deal with the personnel wall before you deal with the legal wall. The key here is like it's a little cyclical, right? You're gonna have to do all of it all at the same time. Depending on the kind of equity structure you plan on having. Are you gonna be the sole member? Are you the only one involved? You might have other people involved, but they're not gonna be equity holders. They're not gonna be part owners of the LLC, right? If that's the case, you have a single member LLC. A single member LLC is very much like a sole proprietorship. It's really just you. And the tax for the single member LLC is it's your tax, right? It attaches to your individual tax return. There isn't a separate tax form for the LLC. But the difference between a single member LLC and a sole proprietorship is you get some protection here. If you build and keep that veil the right way, you'll get some protection that you might not get with a sole proprietorship, right? Multi-member single class. Let's say you've got 3 people. And everybody's going to be a third owner of the LLC, right? So that's multi-member, but it's a single class of ownership, right? So multi-members are taxed not as sole proprietorship. Multi-members are taxed. The default is taxed as a partnership. So again, it goes through, you're taxed as a partnership, right? And then the next one is multi-member, multi-class. So let's say that we've got 3 of you opening a LLC, and you say, okay, you came in the beginning, you started the whole organization, so you're the founder of shares, so you want to have Class A voting, and these 2 you brought along later, and then they want to be, okay, secondary, so maybe they get some voting rights, but not all voting rights, because, you know, the buck stops with you, right? So they may be Class B. So they all have, so you can distinguish between voting and distribution rights if you have different classes of membership. We use this a lot in organizations that are kind of new, like yours, and cash-strapped organizations with people starting new companies and things like that, to say, hey, you know, I need you to help me write this code, or come up with this algorithm for the software, whatever it is, or help me do my website, whatever it is. I can't pay you, but I will pay you with 1% equity, or 5% equity, 2% now and 2% after the project's done, and a bonus of 1%. Whatever it is, that's so flexible with an LLC, right? In that case, you really don't want that person to have voting rights. Likely, right? They were just kind of in, gave you some service, they moved on. You're just paying them over time with equity. So in that case, you might want to have Class B or Class C membership with limited to no voting rights. Maybe equal distribution rights, they get paid just when you get paid based on the percentage, but they don't have a say in the organization. So there's all these different reasons or purposes why you might want different classes, right? And there's series LLCs. Has anybody heard of series LLCs? Right, yep. Most of the time used with property development. It's basically a big umbrella LLC with kind of similar ownership, right? That's the solid ultimate ownership. And then that LLC, you can form an LLC with one person for this property development. That same LLC goes over here and forms another kind of sub-LLC, if you will, under the umbrella of the main LLC to develop apartments on Washington. Maybe this one goes to Sarah, this one goes to Duncan. Whatever it is, you see a lot of that structure in development organizations. We don't use that a lot because, as you can imagine, it gets pretty complicated. The more offshoots you have and the more LLCs you have in that series to manage. But if you're interested in property development, that's something you should definitely look at. Yes, ma'am?
So does that mean they have like a parent and child, that kind of relationship?
Almost, but not quite. It's not really a parent subsidiary relationship. It's just a separate LLC. It truly is a separate LLC. They're all formed under the umbrella of the initial LLC. It's kind of a mechanism, frankly, to combine kind of the accounting and the finances, and to also combine the paperwork. So from a legal perspective, they're separate LLCs, but they just kind of combine for administrative ease and purposes. Because in one hand, it does make it easier if you're all having under the same umbrella. On the other hand, you have to be really good at making sure you keep separate books and records and know when they're consolidated and know when they're not consolidated. Does that make sense? Awesome. So formation documents. So you guys have already done this. Filed an articles of organization. That's the only public document, right? The articles of organization pretty simple and straightforward, and really doesn't have a whole lot of teeth to it other than, hey, the minute you file the articles of organization, the Secretary of State stamps it and sends it back to you. Voila, congratulations, you're an entity, and you're now paying taxes, unless you do other things, right? And then you apply for a federal EIN, which you need, and even sometimes you don't have to be an organization to get an EIN. You need that to conduct business, bank finance, and things like that. It's like the entity social security number. I love the operating agreement for last. The operating agreement is so flexible, it's incredible. Now what am I going to say? It's so flexible, it's terrible. You could put everything in the kitchen sink in the operating agreement. If you try to do that, the operating agreement can be potentially 60, 70, 80 pages long. I urge you not to get there yet. You can always amend the operating agreement. I urge you to start with the basics and say, this is what I need. Some of the basics we'll talk about really come up in the other laws and finance and personnel and operations in terms of what you have. Things that belong in the operating agreement. Name, purpose of the organization, kind of equity structure. Is somebody else allowed to, how and when are distributions made and how are they valued? If someone wants to leave, can they leave? I talk about it as my 4 Ds, right? Operating agreements always have the 4 Ds. My children are named Dina, Devin, and Dylan, so I think I've always been pining for a 4th D, so I came up with this. So what happens in death, disability, divorce, and disinterest, right? That's what the thing is in the operating agreement. You think, again, I practice preventative law, you think you don't need it. If you have more than one member in your LLC, I urge you to have a well-written operating agreement, because that is going to be the crux of all the decisions you're going to make. And it will prevent you guys from fighting and not talking to each other again. I've had too many sisters and too many family members start LLCs and end up not talking to each other. But the operating agreement is your tool to foresee, to the extent possible, and address those issues in terms of distribution rights. What happens if I just want to go sell jewelry on the beach in Florida? You know, and then I'm disinterested. Can I sell it to anybody I want? Or do I have to sell it to somebody that you approve of? Or do I have to sell it to you first? And if you don't buy it, then I can sell it to anybody I want. All those things, right? Same thing with death and disability. And divorce. Now, here's an interesting, you're looking at me going, you know, she looks happily married, but she talks about divorce a lot. So one of the things in Missouri and in many states, if you have, we're a marital property state, right? So if you have marital property, and this can be deemed, your shareholder, your interest in your LLC can be deemed a part of your marital property. So if you get divorced, your spouse, and the former spouse at that point, gets half of your marital property, he or she may get half of your membership LLC interest, right? So by divorce decree or whatever. So what we always say, again, as preventative law, is have in your LLC operating agreement a provision that says if any member's percentage interest or whatever in this LLC is transferred because of a divorce decree of a court of law, then automatically that person, the former spouse getting that membership interest, is going to put his or her membership interest back to the company, and the company pays for it. Right? So that's the way, and then they sign it. The current spouse you have to ask your spouse to say, love you, honey, but sign this in case you ever get half this LLC, you know, so. But most people, it's doable, right? It's preventative law. So we do encourage that. So lots of moving parts on a formation document. So let me jump into finance. I want to make sure information on finance, we're putting the right words in our operating agreement when we talk about this. So taxation, we already talked about this. Single member, sole proprietorship, multi-member partnership. So multi-member, regardless of how many classes you have. One thing that you might want to think about is, let's say, you know what, we're multi-member, we're being treated as a partnership taxation, but because of self-employment tax issues and because of my personal tax rate and my personal financial issues, I might be better off being taxed, right, as an S corporation, so I don't have to pay self-employment tax. I can pay income tax, right, instead. So again, that really depends on a conversation with your accountant. And there's a form that you file, which we'll get to in a minute. Capitalization. So we used to tell people back in the day, hey, just put $1 into your company and get it started. So remember that corporate veil we talked about, right? So if you just put $1 in and don't do anything, I don't know if that's adequately capitalized. I think somebody might be able to come and say, yeah, I don't know, you're just putting up this thing, I don't think it's enough. So it doesn't have to be money. It can be property, it can be sweat equity, right? It could be a lot of different things. But in your cap table, put something in there that says, hey, this is what I have committed in terms of finances, other sweat equity, work that I've done, maybe property, whatever it is, into your LLC to get it started, right? Additional capital contributions. Maybe if you're a single member LLC, you're making additional contributions. But if you're multi-member, what happens if I say, well, I'm going to put in another $100,000, and Christy says, damn, I just went to Rome and bought out the Gucci store, so I don't have $100,000 to put in, so, well, you go ahead, Geetga. Well, guess what? I just diluted her ownership, right? So if the company was only worth $100,000 and I put another $100,000, well, whoa, all of a sudden here I am at, 150 and she's still just put in the 50. So she's suddenly become, in terms of percentage ownership, not very happy person, right? So those are considerations you can put into the operating agreement. So if the company needs more capital, how do we put it in? What happens if somebody can't put it in? Does that mean nobody puts it in? Or does that mean somebody puts it in and, okay, screw Christy, she's diluted from her membership, Which might be the right thing for the company at the end of the day, who knows? But those are kind of decisions and discussions you can have ahead of time and putting into your operating agreement. Members can borrow from the LLC as well. Again, I would address that in the operating agreement. And then how to add on new members. Again, let's say that you bring the two of them on, and then they go, oh yeah, these guys are great, let's bring on the row behind you. Well, are they paying the same amount for the same number of shares or percentage interest? Maybe you've launched the company, you've done awesome. They're coming in at the 11th hour right before an IPO, and they're gonna get as much as for their money that you did when you started the company? Probably not, so let's talk about that. How do we bring in additional members? How do we value what they pay and how they pay it? And then finally, how do we value organization moving forward? The closer we get to success versus the beginning where it's the founders taking more risk, right? When you start the company, there's a lot more risk. There's a chart I didn't put in, but it's like, you've seen this chart, right? That path of entrepreneurship and startup. You go, you find, it's a roller coaster, and then all of a sudden you go, wow, great. And, it's the valley of death that the entrepreneurial world calls it. How do you get out of that valley of death? So, you're taking that risk as a founder. So how are you to value it? How are you to value it for future? Whether you're going to sell your company, whether you're going to convert it into a C corporation, or whether you're going to bring on investors that are going towards a larger company or a C corporation, right? And finally, distributions. How is the LLC, let's say it's minting money, right? It's minting money. How is it going to be distributed? Is it going to be distributed based on percentage ownership? Or is it going to be, some of it needs to be withheld, right, into that company to continue the company to grow? So how do you decide that? How do you value that? Those kinds of things. Where's the money going to come from? Is it going to come out of retained earnings only, like dividends typically do? Or is it going to just come out of like, hey, like my son, you put $1 in his hand and he is buying bubble gum within 5 minutes somewhere. It's like that red cent will burn a hole in his pocket unless he spends it. So it could be that person. Are you going to get the source of funds, and as soon as the money comes in, first in, first out, get it out there and spend it? Or are you going to build, build some equity and build some into the financial bank of the organization as well? Class A, Class B, who gets paid? Everybody generally, right, gets paid. If everybody gets paid, everybody gets paid. But it might be in terms of, well, are they going to get paid first? Who's going to get paid first? Who's going to get paid second? What if we're only going to pay Class A right now, but then Class B we're going to pay? Typically it's the other way, because the Class B ones are the ones, right, that don't have any vote. So you're going to punish them more by saying, you know what, we're going to pay you with the last minute possible. They might have a little claim against you if you do that. So the idea is pay everybody at the same time. It's just advice. But it may not be the same, right? There's different pools. You're going to say 30% is set aside for Class B, 70% is set aside for Class A. So as long as you set the pool and determine what the pool is in your operating agreement, you can pay at the same time, but it doesn't have to be the same amount, right? Withdrawal of members. What happens when, like I said, 4 Ds? Nobody decides to die, I guess. Nobody decides to become disabled, but somebody leaves, and you basically say, what if Christy and I are partners, and all of a sudden, I'll say, yeah, you know what? I am going to sell my shares to you. And then she's like, no, I don't know him, I don't like him, I don't want him in there. Same thing with the next spouse, right? You might not want to be conducting business with somebody that you don't have a relationship with. So the idea would be, the organization would require me to put my shares, put my membership interest to the company first. The company doesn't buy it, I'll put it to the other member. If the other member doesn't buy it or doesn't buy all of it, then I'm free to go sell it to anybody I want on the same terms, but not on different terms. That's usually the only way to do it. Yeah.
How does that affect when you got a divorce in that process?
So the divorce is a wholly different thing. The divorce is an absolute put, right? The divorce, when I say, you guys have heard of puts and calls, right? And yeah. So you usually hear about those in the derivative world, but it's the same concept here. But so the difference is with the divorce, it is an absolute. If you write the document the right way, it's not an option. The person, the ex-spouse, has to turn over his or her shares to the organization, and the organization has to pay for the value of those shares. Again,
It comes to the organization, not to the
exactly.
ex-spouse.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So no ex-spouse, drafted correctly, keeps any membership interest. They just
Okay.
get bought out, basically bought out. Now the question is valuation, right? It's easy to say we're just going to give her or him book value because bye-bye, sayonara, that's all you're going to get. Book value is kind of a straightforward, kind of the lower end, if you will, evaluation, right? Or you might say, you know, it's all these different formulas. It might be EBITDA with a kicker of ×2 or something. Your accountant can help you with some of this terminology and figure out what the valuation is. So you kind of take the value of the organization and figure it out. And certainly with the divorce, but also certainly in the case of somebody coming on board or somebody leaving, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. So one of the things that's interesting is you can't kick out a member, right? So this is, I had students say, well, if this member, a client came in to one of my students and said, well, you know, this member's not behaving correctly. I want to have the right to like kick him out. It's his property. The membership interest, he paid something for it, whether it's equity, money, or something. You cannot just willy-nilly go and take somebody's property away from them, right? Maybe you can in other countries, but in this country we cannot. We have to take, you know, in most cases I have to retract some. But you cannot take somebody's property without paying them or having a good reason. So one of the things that you have in your operating agreement also, you know, is what we used to call back in the day bad boy provisions. I don't know why, but that was kind of what we had. And we used words like clawback and things like that, none of which are very PC these days. But the idea is you have certain kinds of terms set in your operating agreement that says, hey, in the case of like fraud, if you're jailed for something, if you do something that disparages the organization or bring the reputation of the organization down, you know, we by rote can, you know, buy you out. It's an automatic call or a put, again, right? So there are things we have to describe that ahead of time. The operating agreement is complicated because of all of these preventative law opportunities that you have. You can't put every single one in there, the document's going to be this big. But you have to think about what is likely, and we'll talk about risk assessment in a second.
What about spouses doing an LLC together?
So, I've had this question too. Spouses doing LLCs together. One of the things, so everybody wants to do 50-50, right? Especially, you know, my husband and I are 50-50 at home. Well, that's what he says. I say, oh, come on, who makes all the doctor's appointments for the kids and who does all the whatever. But okay, fair enough, we're 50-50. I would encourage you not to own your interest 50-50. 51-49, right? And if you do insist, because we've had people say, it's got to be 50-50, because otherwise, you know, my wife is just going to be screaming at me all night long, or my husband is just going to be moping around all day, you know. So then do it, but make sure you've got a way, again, preventative law, and this is actually preventative marriage and saving as well, have a way to, if there is a deadlock, have a way to break the deadlock, right? So I'll give you an example. It wasn't a husband and wife, it was two sisters. Two sisters decided to start a nice antique business. They were going all over the country, buying antiques and established antiques, but they were also doing valuations. It wasn't just their store. They were going to other places and helping other people value their antiques. And it was, and I said the same thing, and I'm like, okay, what is your, they insisted on being 50-50, insisted on it. I said, great, be 50-50, love my sister too. But what happens if you guys don't agree on something? Oh, no, we'll always agree. Just for my benefit, let me put in a deadlock provision. What would we want the deadlock provision to be? Examples are, we'll let our accountant make the decision. Examples are, let our dad make the decision. Examples are, we're going to go to arbitration under AAA Arbitration America Association and pay for somebody to help us arbitrate, right? A lot of money, you don't want to do that. And I said, well, how did you guys break your, when you were undecided, they were sisters who grew up in a big family, lived in the same room all the time for most of their childhood. So we did rock, paper, scissors. I actually put into that LLC a long drawn-out page, a legal description of rock, paper, scissors. Do you go on 3 or do you go on after 3? What does rock mean? What does paper mean? And what does scissors mean? And I literally, this was one of my most fun drafting assignments I had when I was employed many, many moons ago. And the sisters are still in business, and they have told me, I haven't talked to them for a while, but they did tell me that they actually have to invoke the rock, paper, scissors provision of their deadlock breaking in the LLC. So whatever it is that works for you, use it and put it, okay? So, funding. Most of the time you guys are gonna see this kind of funding, right? Friends and family. You're gonna have somebody say, okay, here, I'm gonna help you invest. You're gonna have maybe sell stock or shares or whatever it is. Loans, most likely a lot of loans, a lot of friends and family. But now we have a different kind of micro lending. Asset licensing. Maybe you've got some really cool asset IP that Alton's going to talk about. Maybe you want to license the use of that copyright, or maybe the curriculum that you've copyrighted, or the piece of music. You're going to have somebody let them use it as in their jingle or whatever it is. Crowdfunding. Anybody thought about crowdfunding? Yeah, awesome. So crowdfunding is kind of new, right? When we think of crowdfunding, we think of like Kickstarter or Indiegogo or Rocket Hub, those guys, right? And so crowdfunding, back in the day, like I was trained initially as a securities lawyer, right? It was a securities nightmare. How do you get money from someone, and without disclosures, and they're just giving you $10 or $50. You've got 1,000 people giving you $100 rather than one person giving you $100,000, right? And how do you manage all of them? Are they all going to have a little piece of the action, skin in the game in your organization? That's when Class B or Class C comes into place. It's a nightmare. But the Jobs Act from 1912, and again updated in 1914 when Obama was in office, has helped a lot, relax a lot of those things.
2014.
I'm sorry, 2014. What did I say? Did I say 1914? Wow, see, I told you I was a really old practice. We thought about it before we even knew. So the Jobs Act, I just love talking about it because I think it's actually, we don't talk about it anymore. I think with the current administration, it's just kind of been, I don't know, it exists, but we don't really discuss it a lot, or not much is done to move forward. A lot of these are loosening generally securities regulations, right, in terms of disclosure, just in terms of saying, I just want to invest, see what it's like, test the waters, as we call it, loosening of the registration requirements, and certainly crowdfunding. Crowdfunding isn't actually quite finalized in the Jobs Act yet. Almost, but we need some work by Congress, which we haven't done yet, in the past 2 years since we've been waiting for it. But the idea is really that you can have these smaller investors, right? Micro lending people that can also help you kind of finance that. And you can do it in a way where they get equity is so far removed from the actual equity that you work with that it's a safe way to do it as well. So, finance documents. Operating agreement. You're going to see this on every wall. Operating agreement, have the equity structure, capitalization, distribution. And remember when I said you can elect if you want to be taxed as an LLC rather than multi-member, if you want to be taxed as an S-corp instead of a partnership, again, based on your self-employment tax or your personal financial situation. Smaller organization file a form 2553 with the IRS tax selection, if desired. Larger entities filing 8832. And at the end of this slide, we have a list of all the documents that I'm talking about. So, you know what, I'm going to skip through this, right? So personnel, I want to hit on personnel really quickly. Internal people, how do you manage them? Let's say you've got employees, staff, you've got directors, committees. Remember, shareholders elect the directors, directors elect the officers, right? And in a LLC, you don't have to have them, but I suggest that you do, right? We'll talk about that, or just number manage, just so everybody knows what role they're playing. And there's some, again, preventative behavior there. LLC management, something that goes into your operating agreement, or actually goes into your articles of organization. Are you member managed or manager managed? It's exactly what it sounds like. Do all the members, do they all get in the kitchen and work with the LLC, or are you going to appoint one person to do the day-to-day stuff? Up to a limit, and after that limit, they go back to all of the membership, right? Usually, if you've got more than 3 people, I would say try the member manager. Just have one person kind of deal with the day-to-day stuff, and then come back to you for anything over $1,000, whatever that threshold that you set for your own organization, right? So I'll skip over this for now. Sorry. External personnel. Everybody needs everybody else. I didn't get here that's standing on the shoulders of many people, and I'm sure business-wise, I would say we all are the same way. Customers, clients, vendors, providers, advisors, you go to a law firm, you go to an accounting firm, whatever. Independent contractor, employee, and we'll get to the difference in that. One thing I'll say, NDA, often, early, and always. Non-disclosure agreements, we'll talk about that in a second. For a couple different reasons, right? We'll get to that in a minute. Independent contractor employee, again, this is another slide I packed full of information for you. Print it out, and I know it's tiny print. Print it out, look at it, and decide. I will urge you, unless you are willing to take on tax withholding liability and a fixed cost versus a variable cost, that you probably look at independent contractors initially. And once you know what is needed and you need somebody full-time and that's all they do, then you can consider an employee. It doesn't matter what you call the person, if it's an independent contractor or an employee, it matters what the IRS calls that person, right? You can give somebody a contractor and say you're an independent contractor, but they come to your office from 8 to 5 every day, they do exactly what you tell them, they use the office equipment, you review them, you have any sense of control over them. They're an employee, I don't care what you call them, right? If somebody comes in and you say, okay, well, it's somebody who's doing something that's kind of piecemeal for you, it's different from what you normally do, like a web designer, something like that, more like an independent contractor. Comes down to control, right? That chart will help you figure that out. So document, again, operating agreement's always on the top of my list, right? Member manage, manager manage, how you pay equity in lieu of cash. Independent contractor agreement if you're going to have one, employment agreement. Now, employment agreement, right? Missouri's an at-will state. Every state has recognizes at-will except for Montana. Did you know that Montana is the only state that's crazy that it does not recognize at-will employees? So I feel like Cliff Clayton, I know all that useless information, but so employment agreement. Have an employment agreement if you want them to stick around. Because people by tab feel like but you can still have an employment agreement and still be at-will. You can say in the employment agreement, these are your job descriptions, these are your duties, these are the specs I expect you to perform, Mr. CTO, whatever it is, right? But at the end of the day, these are the benefits you'll get, but at the end of the day, you're still at will. You can still say that. If somebody says, I don't want to be at will, I want a 3-year contract for my CEO, then you can certainly do that as well. So ownership of IP, we'll talk about in a little bit before we get Alton up here. Confidentiality agreement, right? And I say NDA, so I think really when I draft, I put the confidentiality agreement, the non-compete, and the non-solicitation all in one document. It could be a very simple document. You have every single employee, every single person you ever talk to, whether it's that list that I just showed you, the advisor or independent contractor or whatever, that basically says, hey, dude, I'm telling you what I'm doing for my business, and I'm kind of letting you look under the tent. Don't compete with me, right? Number 2, I'm telling you who my employees, my independent contractors, and my customers are. Don't take them, don't solicit them. One note about soliciting employees, courts are really moving away from that. So the most you can say don't solicit employees is for 1 year. Any more than that, the court, if it goes to court, the court won't uphold it. Non-competes is usually, it has to be limited in geographic scope. You can't say you can't do like this at all anywhere. If you go to Alaska, maybe you can do it, whatever the limitation is, right? But I also use, to me, the confidentiality is kind of the most important. Those are equally important, but those are especially important if you're in a very kind of unique trade or business, right? But the confidentiality is key. Yes, sir?
Do those survive the employee being dismissed?
Yes. Limitation, though. So non-compete, you can say, but once the employee is dismissed, we used to be able to say, you can't compete with me or solicit other employees for 5 years. Courts don't like that anymore. California doesn't like non-competes at all. Montana doesn't recognize that rule. California does not recognize non-competes. Most other states will recognize a non-compete for up to 2 years. You're pushing it to 3 years. It's not a bright line. It's not a smell test, right? So I would say no more than 2 years, pushing it at 3. No more than geographic scope. So I always use the north leg of the arch, 100-mile radius of the north leg of the arch. The center of the arch or whatever. Don't compete with any of the clients that you worked on when you were my employee. Again, you're trying to protect your business interests, and courts will uphold that. You have that right to do that. But they have to balance it with the person's right to earn a living. If they can only do, this kind of patent widget, you're going to have to kind of let them do it. Even if it's, but then you might be able to limit them and say, don't do it in Missouri, do it somewhere else. Again, not competitive. But yeah, they are. Even if it's termination with cause, for sure, termination without cause as well, if you write the agreements correctly. And different uses for confidentiality agreements, right? Investors, employees, independent contractors, general contractors, just when you leave the company, that disinterest, that fourth D, the child I never had. So operation, I'm gonna whip through this, Christina, I'm running short on time.
You're good.
What do we need to do to succeed? This is the stuff that you guys are thinking about day to day, right? How do we transact business? What I want to focus your attention on for kind of my purposes in terms of documenting and papering the startup and the formation of the organization is figuring out how to manage your risk and figuring out how to like protect your assets, right? I don't mean just your financial assets that are in the bank and the dollar sign in front of them, but your assets in terms of intangible assets as well, intangible assets that Elton's going to talk about. So risk management, I packed as much as I could in one slide for you. But risk management is something we don't think about, but it's a good time to lay that foundation, right, that I talk about. It's a good time to start thinking about it early on. Take an afternoon, sit with your colleagues, sit by yourself with a cup of tea somewhere, and or better yet, maybe a vodka tonic somewhere. I'm not doing my best thinking. But you sit down and you assess the risk. There you go. You assess the risk. What am I doing? What am I selling? What is the event or service or product? Assess my risk. Evaluate the risk. Is there liabilities? Could I physically harm somebody? Am I running a driving school or whatever it is? Is there a potential for physically harming someone? Are my workers using forklifts and stacking stuff up on top of the shelf? What is it? Is there a potential for tort liability, physical liability? Is there a potential for business risk? Maybe I'm not complying with the laws in the way I'm supposed to be that are industry specific or regulations or OSHA or whatever that applies to you. Maybe there's business interruption if I don't do it correctly and the business just shuts down. Then what do I do? What do I do with my employees? What do I do with my... So assess that, analyze and evaluate the risk in terms of, okay, how likely is this going to happen? So one of the things I use, you guys have probably seen this before, what's low risk, low occurrence? And then even if it does occur, no big deal, low cost, right? Or high risk of occurrence, still if it happens, it doesn't happen. The key is going to be high risk of occurrence and high cost. And when you get to those, you go, hey, okay, what is going to trigger that risk? How do I mitigate that? How do I stop that risk from happening? Or how do I decrease the likelihood of it happening by mitigating that? And that may be to train employees better. Maybe to have kind of external personnel to say, hey, I want you to sign a liability waiver that you're coming in to use a forklift to stack 80 pounds boxes over your head, but you're not going to hold me liable. Whatever it is, figure out how to identify the triggers, keep those triggers from happening. And worst case scenario, let's say that the plan, it happens, the worst thing happens, right? Figure out what you're going to do. Most likely you're going to get insurance of some sort, commercial general liability. You guys have it? Everybody have it? Okay, get it? Think about it. Think about having commercial general liability. If you're doing a lot of contract work, think about getting a contractual liability waiver. Property insurance and the usual, the rest of it. D&O insurance, director and officer insurance. If you're working with a lot of financial issues, I suggest you get that as well. To protect your person inside that's working on your books and records and things like that, right? Intellectual property. I'm going to whip through this because I know Elton's going to take care of it. So trademark, right? We have different kinds of trademarks. I'm sure you're going to cover that, Elton, so I won't go through that. Copyright. Trademark basically is, Adidas, Starbucks. It's the trade name, right? It's the mark that you're going to be identified. The reason trademark law wants you to be careful is make sure that there's no confusion of kind of the origin of that product that underlies that trademark, right? Copyright. Copyright is anything that you take and you put to a tangible medium, right? You have an idea and you write it down into a book or a pamphlet. You automatically have a copyright in that, or the person who wrote it, right? What if you're an employee? Again, with your employment agreements or your policies, you want to make sure the employee knows that under law, typically, if the employee creates something for an employer, it is within the scope of employment that it belongs to the employer, not the employee. But if they create something that's off, a little tangent off, it might just belong to the employee, certainly with an independent contractor. So you want to make sure that whatever you're giving somebody, let's say you give somebody, hey, here's information about my entity, put it in my website, create this website. Well, who owns the website and the language of the website? You want to make sure it's you. So otherwise, the default can be that the creator, putting it in a tangible medium, is the one that's going to own it, right? Patent grants rights to the inventor. Anybody thinking about a patent? Yeah? No? Oh, good. Awesome. Great. I know I'm going to talk a lot more deeply about that. Utility design and plat patents, I think about 80% of them are utility patents. Gives rights to the inventor. And again, this could be something that's an asset that you can license, actually, Trade secret. Coca-Cola, that's the famous one, right? If you don't want a patent because a patent will expire in 20 years, and you don't know how to reboot it, so you get a trade secret because it never expires. You protect it with your life. And that way, it's protected as a trade secret. Nobody knows it unless it's brought up by court of law. Yes, ma'am?
For trade secret though, will they add any value to the company?
It can be, yes, there is. There is a valuation of that. Again, without disclosing it, right? So Coca-Cola, for example, highly values that trade secret. And their recipes are trade secrets, supposedly. It's been out there. It's been in, when any of these challenge their right as a trade secret, court of law, it's, but then it's redacted, right? So yes, there certainly is a value. But it's harder to prove, it's harder to protect. That's the risk that you take with a trade secret. I suggest, maybe not right now, but when you get a chance to take a breather and have that cup of tea or a vodka tonic, do a risk assessment and do a risk management plan. There's all kinds of tools on the internet for that. Your insurance companies will be able to help you with that as well. Again, an overall risk assessment. Think about insurance, certainly IP registration and licensing that Elton's going to talk about. Asset purchase agreement, at the end of the day, maybe you go, hallelujah, I have done great. Somebody's going to come in and buy my company, and I am going to Bali and live on the beach. An asset purchase agreement at the end of the day of your organization is somebody buys just the assets. You keep the liability, unfortunately, unless you can talk them into doing a stock purchase agreement or membership purchase agreement in an LLC, right? That way you can say, okay, we're going to buy it all, kit and caboodle, the assets and the underlying liability. Buyers always want asset purchase, sellers always want stock purchase, right? So that's something to kind of negotiate and come somewhere in between. So this is a tool, this is all the documents that I've talked about that's listed in one place for you. And my final thoughts, takeaway. You already know all this. We in St. Louis have a great ecosystem for support. I'm glad you guys are here and using it, and I continue to encourage everybody to use that. Start with an LLC, which all of you are already doing. Convert, you can always convert where you need to be. Be careful when you're talking to people about anything, particularly funding. Funding is especially important because of securities laws. It doesn't matter how small or big you are. There's a whole body of federal securities laws. You're asking about federal. That's the one thing I forgot about. Federal securities laws apply as well, but state securities laws apply to these small organizations, right? Small entities, small organizations, startups, mom and pops, whatever you want to call them. So you want to make sure before you talk to 100 people or send out a postcard saying, hey, I'm looking for people to put some money into me, my organization, stop. Call a lawyer, call Christy, call me something. But friends and family exception in Missouri, you can talk to maybe friends and family. Maybe I would usually say 8 to 10 people. That's okay, as long as you can say they're friends and family. Anything beyond or more that, we have regulations and filings and things like that that you might have to be filing because you're offering security in the state of Missouri if you talk to people about buying interest into your entity and organization, right? NDAs, can't emphasize enough how often to use them. Independent contractor instead of employees, people say that's a bold statement for me to make. I've been doing this for 28 years now, and trust me, start with independent contractors first. You don't want the burden of the fixed cost this early. Put a circle C on everything, and I also will talk to you about this too. You write it, you put something in a tangible medium, right? Something it's either a CD or talking cassettes, whatever, albums, really getting old, 1914. Whatever it is that you create, put a circle C on it with your name after it.
At least you didn't say track.
Right, yeah, I did have an 8-track player, the one that looked like a robot, I remember. The other thing in terms of, I know Elton will talk about, keep track. If you've got an invention, a patent in particular, or keep track of who did what towards that from the beginning, right? That was it's gonna create a paper trail, if you will, of true ownership of that idea, or not idea, of that patent. You don't have to be the first, just better and distinguishable. Everybody says, well, somebody already did this. Who cares? I don't. And I always say, mind your P's. Some of the hardest things about starting a business is people, property, and paper, right? You gotta learn how to manage people, which you already do. Property, I don't mean just real estate, but I also mean intellectual property and other assets that you have in terms of asset protection. And finally, paper. Get it all on paper. Keep it all on paper and keep it somewhere safe. When I say paper, I don't literally mean paper. You can have it digitally as well. So those are my thoughts. And now, go get them.
1 or 2 questions?
I know, I talk fast and I overwhelm it. I promise.
Yeah, see why we get along.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about variations in NDAs, like how you recommend when you're drafting them for organizations? Like, what is defendable versus non-defendable in certain aspects?
That's great, good question, thank you. So there's different ways to do NDAs. So for example, I will have an NDA. If I go talk to, ideas, whatever. If I go talk to somebody about an idea to see if it's viable for their business or for me to do, I will have what I call a kind of contract of adhesion. It's an NDA that says, hey, I don't sign it, I already give it to you, and you sign it, I'm not going to talk to you until you sign it. And so it's a page and a half, and it basically says in exchange, contracts, there has to be consideration, offer, acceptance, and consideration, boring law stuff. But so in exchange for you vying to get business from me, and for me to talk to you about my business and what I would want from your services, sign this NDA. Basically defines what, the key to NDAs is defining what is confidential information, right? That is the key. If it's already publicly available, it's not confidential. If it becomes publicly available from that moment on, it's not confidential. So one of the other things we always worry about, particularly those of you who are working with patents, what if it's reverse engineerable, right? So if they reverse engineer it, then is that still confidential? So I propose that we have that in the, even if it's reverse engineered, but if you got it from me, it's still confidential. So in terms of, so those are kind of the straightforward, simple ones, right? But in terms of the things that are not kind of protectable, are generally things that somebody else could have, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the essence of the continuation of your business. So, the law tries to bring a balance between the company's rights and what they've invested in you to do your job, or as an independent contractor or whatever, and their business interests that they have put resources towards, with your right to be able to do what you want. So if it's frivolous information that really doesn't go to the heart of the organization, it's unlikely going to be maintained as confidential. It's irrelevant, right, at that point. So those kinds of things. So it really comes down to the definition. And then the duration. Confidential information, interestingly enough, so even though I said for non-competes and non-solicitation, kind of we're pushing the edge of 3 years, and 2 years is a good solid place to be right now. Confidential information, as long as the information is deemed to remain confidential to your organization, it can be deemed that way in perpetuity, right? Unless it becomes publicly, known, or unless the patent, expires and it isn't, booted up again or whatever. So it can be confidential information forever. But it really comes down to the definition of what's included. Don't include everything in the kitchen sink, because that you risk that the whole clause is going to be thrown away. Some states will allow judges to kind of blue line and say, yeah, this is just too broad, we'll get rid of that. Some states don't allow blue lines, so the judge will have to throw the whole provision away, which means nothing is confidential. So be realistic.
One more, real quick.
Awesome.